Again. Okay, this is called Walking Around Town, and as I said, it's set up as a framework for going around New York City. It's an introduction to New York City. If you look at the picture, you can see the how New York is surrounded by buildings, and then the middle is Central Park. To the left is over the river. So this is fiction, but it's, as I said, it's set up like a tour around New York. It was a light spring Sunday in Brooklyn, New York. Doug and his wife Eve were enjoying it with their copy of the Sunday New York Times newspaper, which they would pleasingly read section by section over a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and of course, some warm and soft New York City bagels. Both Doug and Eve were hard-working people, having to commute by subway throughout the week into different parts of their neighboring borough of Manhattan, where both of their offices were located. So Manhattan, basically the city of New York, is divided up into boroughs. Therefore, they usually took full advantage of their days off by lounging around their apartment, reading and watching television. This was especially true throughout the winter when temperatures were too cold and the skies were too cloudy in New York to make George and Eve leave their place if they did not absolutely have to. They could rest and recover from their long work week indoors, away from the snow and chilly temperatures, just as well as they could outside, and probably even better so. However, this was the first clear and relatively warm day of the year that Eve and Doug could go outside and enjoy wholeheartedly, without having to bundle up and pile on layers of clothing. Eve became anxious as the morning neared a close and the afternoon came upon them. She desperately wanted to go outside, exploring and snap photos with her brand new digital camera, which she had bought just the day before. She was worried that Doug would not be up for such a trip, and he would give the excuse that he was too tired. Eve was also hoping she could coax Doug into becoming a little more enthusiastic about photography himself, so they could plan fun photo excursions together. After all, they lived in one of the 5 boroughs of the city of New York. So New York is the state, and then New York is the city, New York, New York. And Manhattan is, of course, central part of it, which ranks one of the biggest cities in the world and is overflowing with countless images worth capturing on a camera. Eve really liked photographing the city, though she would not take as many pictures in the frigid wintertime, and thought getting Doug into it would give them an excuse to have some extra fun time together. Doug, Eve began a little tenderly and nervously, how about we head into the city today? New York tends to refer to Manhattan as a city, even if they already are residents of the 5 boroughs, because the island is really its epicenter. What for? Asked Doug, sipping his juice with a puzzled look on his face. Eve sighed. She was wishing for the conversation to go more smoothly. Well, I'd like to take some photos today. It's beautiful outside, and I thought you'd like to come along, she said. Doug replied with a simple, oh. He folded his paper and put it down without much of an expression. Eve didn't know how to react to that. Then Doug got up and left the room, making Eve wonder what in the world that meant. Did he want to go? Was he angry at the request? What are you doing? She asked, projecting her voice down the hall. I'll be right there, he said. After a moment, Eve heard Doug's footsteps re-entering the little dining room. She looked up and saw him smiling, holding 2 cameras, her brand new one and the other one he had secretly bought for himself as well. So Eve doubted Doug was ready to go, but he's ready to go. He's got 2 cameras. Doug and Eve left their apartment and began walking the pavement toward the subway stop they were very familiar with, looking forward to their day of photographing the wonderful sights of New York City. What they, like most New Yorkers and city dwellers around the world, probably did not even realize is that they were going to observe all the highlights while being part of a tremendous ecosystem. Here's a strange word, ecosystem. It usually applies to something very natural. So it's used in a way that has a little bit of tension in it. These are living people, of course, in a certain environment, but usually, as I said, it applies to something natural. People usually think of an ecosystem as something more natural than a city with incredibly tall man-made buildings on top of concrete that runs parallel to streets with zipping vehicles spewing toxic carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. Typically, the ocean comes to mind as an example of an ecosystem, or the rainforests of South America, while the African deserts could be another. However, an ecosystem is simply defined as a community filled with living and non-living organisms that interact with each other within a particular environment. And an urban ecosystem is arguably the one ecosystem that human beings are in fact most familiar with, while it is also arguably the only ecosystem in the world that is growing. Like they usually do on Mondays through Fridays when traveling to and from their jobs, Doug and Eve decided to take a local subway. That's how a lot of people get around in New York. They don't drive. They take the cab, they walk, or they take the subway because traffic is outrageous. So they took a local subway line from their home in Brooklyn to the island of Manhattan to enjoy their Sunday. New York has a massive subway system that helps people get around. The trains travel above and below ground, over bridges, and through tunnels. These electrical behemoths a behemoth is something that's very large, are a vital part of the city's ecosystem, for they, in effect, help people survive a bit easier than if the trains did not exist. Human beings are incredibly social creatures. In other words, they naturally desire communication and companionship with other people. The city's subways allow that to happen with much more freedom and ease, not to mention the quicker pace that is possible compared to the alternatives of a horse and buggy or walking. Furthermore, the subways also help individuals get to their jobs, allowing them and other people to be productive. Necessary goods such as food and supplies become more easily available to people with better transportation. Plus, important services like medical treatment and education can be more easily taken advantage of. Gee, sorry about that. Both Doug and Eve took some last-minute photos of the incredible Manhattan skyline through the windows of the subway car before it headed underground into a tunnel and through the East River into the subterranean depths of Manhattan. So this subway goes under the East River. While Eve and Doug walked upstairs from the subway station onto a Manhattan sidewalk, the first thing they saw were tremendous skyscrapers standing thousands of feet high. The island of Manhattan is littered with hundreds of huge buildings that have become world famous for not just height, but also for their recognizable architecture and symbolism of mankind's never-ending desire to create. Doug and Eve immediately reached for their cameras and started taking some photos of buildings like the Empire State Building, which used to be the tallest building in the world, no longer, the Freedom Tower, and the Chrysler Building. Many of these skyscrapers are essentially incredibly large office spaces. Therefore, the buildings serve a vital function in the ecosystem in that they house many people throughout the day while they are working on any number of projects that could help others. A large percentage of these buildings, are also homes to restaurants and eateries where people not only enjoy plenty of available and nourishing food, but commiserate with each other as well. And the commiseration or commiserate means to share, sort of. You say something you're unhappy with, somebody else says something they're unhappy with. One of the drawbacks of so many skyscrapers is that it creates shade. This might sound like a positive, and it particularly is because it gives people relief from the hot rays of the sun. However, too little exposure to the sun is not a good thing either. The sun is blocked so often from New York residents by those buildings that people are not getting enough vitamin D into their bodies because the sun's rays help build the level of vitamin D. Still, it is important to recognize that these buildings of Manhattan, in some ways, as natural a thing as an anthill or a bird's nest. First of all, Human beings, who are undoubtedly a part of nature, have built them, and they have been built by raw materials taken up from the planet's resources. Certainly, soil has been covered by concrete and iron, but there are plenty of places in nature where there is no rich soil, like Antarctica, for instance. The previously hilly island that had thousands of trees on it has simply been exchanged for an urban ecosystem containing different things that serve the same function as many others that are called more natural. So this author is trying to say that even though this is concrete and steel and pavement and glass, that it is still a system where people live. And in that way, it's a natural system. In addition, skyscrapers still must be built with respect to many laws of nature. An elite architect, along with a construction crew, cannot simply erect a building that stretches to an infinite height. The effects of gravity, wind, and yes, the density of soil still within the earth of Manhattan must be considered in planning and construction of a building. So he's trying to still say that New York as a system still is based on different variables that affect what can and can't be done. Eve knew that if she was going to have a successful day of photography, she and her husband would have to take a trip to Central Park. Central Park is located in the middle of Manhattan, takes up quite a chunk of land. It includes a couple of ponds, hundreds of trees, large grassy lands, rocky parts, and trails for urban hiking. Many species of animals call Central Park home too. For some of them, it may be the only place within New York where they can actually survive. Talking about some of the animals, there's actually no place else for them to go because that's the only green area. It's a long piece, but I think it's a good one. Central Park was constructed because city planners knew that New Yorkers would need a getaway location, a place where they could reconnect with nature, or at least the parts of it that are more traditionally considered natural. It is certainly the case that New Yorkers need this outlet, which explains why Central Park still exists today, as the price of local real estate has only increased over the years. Parks like this once softened the urban experience, and they're common areas, giving locals a place to relax and engage in important recreational activities. Many scientists note that though cities are ecosystems and growing part of nature, the loss of greenery is a severe problem that needs to be changed. The urban planners of today are becoming more sensitive to this by making sure to include parks, taking a page out of the books of those who helped create Central Park as they continue to build new cities and expand upon those that have always been founded. And it's similar to in Spokane, we have Downtown Park, Riverside Park, Riverfront Park, and then we have Manitou Park, which is very natural. And it's got a lot of flowers and they're all planted, but it's got some rocks and some little trails too that seem more natural. Some bridges, some rock bridges. Same thing. People go there for relaxation. Doug and Eve strolled around the park for quite a while. They took tons of photos, ate lunch together, and even rode the famous merry-go-round. They were truly taking advantage of the pleasures allowed by the existence of such an incredible and unique location. When Doug and Eve left Central Park, they began to chat about all the noise in the city and the overflowing garbage cans that were seemingly on every block. These are common complaints made by many about the urban ecosystem. It might be more noticeable just to have or leaving such a beautiful place. Though they are considered to be large negatives of urban life, it is nearly impossible for noise pollution and garbage to be avoided. And nowadays in Central Park, because so many people are not going to restaurants because they're closed, I'm talking about New York in general, there's a huge rat problem. The rats have always been there in New York, but now they're out looking for food. They used to have enough food from the garbage, but now they're out looking for food. And these are rats that are probably over 6 inches long. Noise pollution is a byproduct of the large population and all the transportation needed to get them around. Without such transportation, humans would not be able to live, prosper, and interact as effectively. Many people would rather not think about the existence of bugs, rats, and other organisms that can live off garbage, but they too are part of the ecosystem and would not be able to survive as easily in many parts of the world. We're almost done here. I know it is a long story, but I think it's an interesting introduction to a parallel between ecosystem and New York. It gives you some information about New York, one very, very large city. Doug and Eve took the same subway back to their home in Brooklyn. Tired from a long day of moving around the city, they kicked off their shoes and sat on the couch in preparation for a nice movie viewing. The film was a documentary about living in the backwoods of Montana, enjoying life in a forest ecosystem, very different from what they just did. Doug and Eve thought about vacationing there, inspired by their afternoon in Central Park, wanting to be closer to some more nature. They didn't even stop to think that they had both been active participants in an urban ecosystem, a particularly unique part of nature over the course of the entire day. All right, long story. Let's get to the questions and see how we do. I'll scroll down and we will pull up the question sets. All right, here we go. What does Eve want to do with Doug? Does she want to watch television, lounge around the apartment, take photos in Manhattan, or go shopping in Manhattan? Well, we know from the story, she wants to take photos in Manhattan. She's got a new digital camera, and so does Doug. So they want to capture their journey through the urban ecosystem. What does the author mainly describe in the passage? The makeup of an urban ecosystem, the makeup of a rural ecosystem, a tour of Central Park, and the importance of city planning. She mostly describes the makeup of an urban ecosystem. Urban meaning city, suburban right outside the city. Outside the suburban area, you have the rural area. In Spokane, the valley is considered suburban. Eve is uncertain that Doug will want to go on a photo walk with her. What sentence from the passage best supports the statement? This is a little tough question. A, Eve sighed. She was wishing for the conversation to go more smoothly. Or B, Doug, Eve began a little tenderly and nervously. How about we head into the city today? Or C, well, I'd like to take some photos today. It's beautiful outside, and I thought you'd like to come along, she said. It was a light spring Sunday in Brooklyn, New York. Well, what shows that she's a little uncertain? I think it's that Doug, Eve began a little tenderly and nervously. That's so she's uncertain. Those are the words the adverbs that show she's uncertain. How about we head into the city today? So that would be B. Okay, let's try 4. Based on the passage, why might someone be less likely to recognize New York as an ecosystem? A, New York has buildings that are built by humans. B, New York City has a massive subway system that helps people get around. That's true, that's a fact, but it doesn't identify it as less than people would think of it as an ecosystem. New York does not seem to have a lot of natural features. And D, New York City does not have a rainforest. We're going to go with C here. New York City does not seem to have a lot of natural features. All right, that's why you wouldn't think of it as an ecosystem, because they're usually, as we said, natural. Here's the main idea question. This is what holds the passage together. A, the urban ecosystem in New York. B, the best tourist spots in New York City. C, how to take good photographs. D, a disagreement between Doug and Eve. And passage is mostly about the urban ecosystem of New York City. Okay, let's do number 6. How does the narrative of Eve and Doug's photo walk fit within the overall structure of the passage? A, it is a factual introduction to life in New York City. B, it is a focus point of the passage which the author enhances with details about New York City. B is sounding awfully good to me. Let's try C. It is an anecdote that is unrelated to the rest of the passage. And D, it is a frame in which the author presents facts about New York City's ecosystem. Okay, let's go back to that question. That's a tough question. How does the narrative of Eve and Doug photo walk fit within the overall structure of the passage? I think for that one, we got to go to D. B's close, D's better. It is a frame within which the author presents facts about New York City's ecosystem. Definitely. It's a framework to give you, to make it fiction, to make it a little bit more exciting, to present all the facts. All right, let's do number 7. Choose the answer that best completes the sentence below. These are always grammatical, and they're joining words. The abundance of skyscrapers in New York creates a lot of shade. And then blank, resident New Yorkers do not receive enough vitamin D from the sun rays. So we got to go with B here. The abundance of skyscrapers in Manhattan creates a lot of shade. As a result, residents in New York do not receive enough vitamin D from the sun's rays. All right, let's try these short answer ones. 8, what is an ecosystem as defined by the package? Okay, an ecosystem is relatively closed where different variables are contained and working on each other. Like, for example, how much sun, how much water, what kind of structures, what's under the structures, what's above the structures, who's in these structures. And usually it refers to something, a natural environment, like a desert's an ecosystem, or a rainforest is an ecosystem. Or in Spokane, we got the channeled scablands, you know, the basalt, those are considered an ecosystem. So, but here we got New York City. Okay, let's do number 9. A negative element in New York's ecosystem is noise pollution. What is an example of a positive element of New York City's ecosystem that isn't identified in the passage? And why is it positive? I think a positive aspect might be considered Central Park. It's green, you can run there, you got trails, it's large, trees, some water, and some animals hang out there that are only in Central Park as far as in New York City, because they can only live where it's green and natural. Okay, one more question and we're going to call it a day today because I'll never get through another passage. Let's do number 10. Explain how different parts of an ecosystem can have an impact on one another by using an example from the passage. So let's take a look. Let's consider the buildings. The buildings are made out of concrete or brick or nowadays some sort of synthetic materials and combinations of maybe plastics or plasters. Sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what they are made out of. And then they have steel structures. And then they go into some sort of foundation. And then they are still based on the earth. I mean, there's nothing else to be based on other than the earth. So that's how these various aspects of the ecosystem fit together. And another aspect of how things in New York City fit together might be the weather. Do you see the sun? Are you in a cave, like because of the height of the buildings? Does the pollution affect you? So these are things that alter the ecosystem. What causes pollution? Burning coal and cars. That's why the subways are so important, because if you had everybody in New York having a car, not only would there be no place for them to keep them, you would not have anything else in New York City, and it'd be terribly, terribly polluted. So got to be thankful for the subway, and you got to be thankful for mass transit and taxis. All right. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Let's call it a day. I hope to see everybody on Monday. The quarter is winding down. Actually, now that I think about it, Monday holiday. It's Memorial Day. Okay, I'll see you on Tuesday then. Have a good 4-day break. Talk to you later.